really so grateful to be here. So I was driving over, and I don't have a long drive. I live about 2 miles, so I was pretty long. So I didn't have time to put many thoughts together, but the one thought I came up with was, you know, in my career, when I was working, I had the opportunity, like today, to do a lot of public speaking. I would speak to our employees about various things. I would do training classes, and I became very comfortable doing that, and I enjoyed it. And in driving over here today, I realized the reason why I did enjoy it. And it was because I realized at the time that I was the subject matter expert in the room. Well, I heard there's 16 survivors here today, so I am far from the subject matter experts. I think all 16 of us are our own subject matter experts. We have our own stories to tell. We have our own experiences, our fears, our anxieties, our ups, our downs. We know our journeys. So this is different for me today. I am not the subject matter expert, and maybe I'm begging forgiveness as I go through my talk, because it's my journey. But I know everyone here could come up here and give a story that is just as compelling and meaningful as mine. So with that, let me get started. I actually wrote this down, and I have a tendency to write things down and then never look at them. But I'm really going to try and follow my script today. So, as Paige said, my name is Paul Hutter. I'm 67 years old. I live only a few miles from here. I could have walked here, but I would hate to have to cross that Glenwood traffic. As Paige said, I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 43 years. Luckily, she's a nurse. And the last time I was in this building, she received an award for the top nurse at Wake Med Hospital. So, being a lung cancer patient, that's put me in good hands. I've been very fortunate. We have 3 married daughters, 2 granddaughters, and on September 1st, another granddaughter should arrive. I don't know what it is about our family, but we can only produce girls. So I'm really grateful to be here today. I say this because less than 2 years ago, I was really in a dark place in my fight against lung cancer. My cancer had progressed to stage 4, and I really had no good treatment options. Around that time, we were preparing for the wedding of my middle daughter, Kim. She's a nurse practitioner. That helps also. I was really happy to be there to participate in her wedding. In the weeks leading to the event, Kim would come over to our house, and we would be selected and we would practice our father-daughter games. We take the song by Paul Simon, ironically called Father-Daughter, and it really was well suited to us. But knowing what the future was for me, we probably did as much crying, to be honest, as we did dancing. Turns out Kim would leave. We had our dance practice, shed our tears. But Susan, my wife, and I also liked this song, and we would put it on. And we did basically the same thing. We danced, we cried, we hugged. Turns out we weren't really good dancers, but we really did master the crying and the hugging part. And as you all know, our cancer diagnosis, we tend to do that. Well, the day of the wedding arrived, and although it was small in numbers, remember, this was times of COVID, it was beautiful, and everyone had a blast. Tim and I did not embarrass ourselves at the dance floor. We didn't shed any tears. I gave a very heartfelt father of the bride speech. I wanted my talk to be very memorable. I truly believed it was my last opportunity to be my best self in front of my family and my friends. That was less than 2 years ago. In the days following the wedding, and my wife learned this only a few months ago, I wrote a letter to her and my girls. It wasn't an obituary, but it was an affirmation that I had lived truly a very good life, better than I could have ever imagined. I wanted them to know that they had brought me so much joy. I was at peace with my fate, and I did not want my misfortune to darken their lives ahead. Well, fortunately, I have not had to share that letter. Only a few weeks after the wedding, I started in a clinical trial for targeted medicine that is working very well for me. It has allowed me to live what I consider to be a very near normal life. Now to my story. I was first diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, adenosarcoma, stage 3A, in early 2019. Prior to my diagnosis, I was fit, I thought I was healthy, was a never smoker, and had absolutely no symptoms. My daily routine at that time was to go to the YMCA and exercise nearly every morning before going home to work. At the time, my wife was also going to the Y, and she was really getting into spin classes. I don't know if you know what spinning is, but it's stationary bicycles. She said, "Paul, you should really do spin classes. I think you'll like it." And I kind of wasn't really into that, but she kept bugging me, and eventually I listened to her, like I always do. And she was absolutely right. I love those spin classes. You see, the Y had just installed new bicycles in the bike room. And most importantly, they had just installed an electronic leaderboard so that you could see how your performance compared against the other people in the class. I really love competing against the other riders in the room. And I was very proud of myself because 9 times out of 10, I was at the very top of the league. And what they did particularly good for me is I was the oldest guy in the class. My poor wife, Susan, had to listen to me brag and tell her time and time again, hey, guess who was number 1 this morning? It was me. So, like you, my diagnosis of lung cancer came as a complete shock. My family and I were blindsided by it. We didn't see it coming. It was found incidental to another routine medical test. A 6-centimeter mass was found in my right lower lobe. The term mass soon became malignant tumor, and my cancer journey was off and running. I underwent a lobectomy, and because of the size of the tumor and some nearby lymph node involvement, I underwent adjuvant chemotherapy and radiation. As I said, at the time I was stage 3. I tolerated all of my treatments really well and began my new normal life. I went back to the YMCA and began to exercise again, although I did not return to my swim classes. I think I was afraid that I would no longer hold the top of the place on the league. I remember that right after my surgery, my oncologist told me she had ordered genetic testing. She explained there were several treatments available, including targeted medicine and immunotherapies, that worked well for people having certain genetic mutations. A few weeks later, my genetic report came back. The report showed that I had a rare EGFR exon 20 insertion mutation. When I first heard this, I thought this was good because I knew there were approved treatments for EGFR lung cancers. However, my oncologist kindly informed me that none of these treatments will work for my exon 20 mutation. She mentioned that research was being done on exon 20, but at that time there were no effective treatments. So, like all people, when I got home, I did a quick Google search on exon 20, and the prognosis for exon 20 patients was very poor. Exon 20 patients had much lower survival rates than the other more conventional and treatable EGFR-driven cancers. At that time, having a difficult-to-treat cancer didn't really consume my thoughts. And that was because my CT scans were clean. They were good. I thought I was healthy. I was considered net, no evidence of disease, and at that time, no further treatment was called for. I knew there was a good chance that my cancer would return someday, but I was hopeful that I would be one of the lucky ones. Well, it turned out I wasn't so lucky. In September of 2020, 18 months after my initial diagnosis, things changed quickly. My scans showed progression. I developed a large pleural effusion, which required the insertion of a pleural strain. Several lymph nodes were enlarged, and a new lesion showed outside my lung. This came with a stage 4 diagnosis and the obvious need to treat my now metastatic cancer. As I said earlier, I do live here in Raleigh, and we are really fortunate to have two major cancer centers, UNC and Duke, located nearby. Within a few days of getting my scan results, I saw my oncologist at UNC to discuss my new treatment plan. I was offered a few options, none of which really held much promise for my exon. Sue and I left the doctor's office feeling less than hopeful, probably more on the verge of disappointment. We walked out of our office, and as we were walking to my car, we already decided I needed to seek a second. So before leaving the parking lot in Chapel Hill, I got on the phone to call Duke Cancer Center. I felt very lucky to get an appointment the very next morning with a thoracic surgeon whom I had seen early in my cancer journey. Can you imagine that? The next morning, you say you get an appointment. I really thought things were looking up at that point, but that was very short-lived. The second opinion held no more promise than the day before. Driving home from Duke that day, I knew that my treatment options had little chance of success to control my cancer. This is where things changed. So I got home from Duke, and I remembered that there was an organization dedicated to helping exon 20 patients. I am not a Facebook person, but I was able to find the exon 20 group Facebook page. only that morning, a few hours while I was still at Duke, a few hours before while I was still at Duke, they posted the results, the preliminary results of the clinical trial. And I looked at the results. It was a stage 1 clinical trial for an experimental medicine designed to treat my specific rare mutation. It was a medicine called CLN-081. Doesn't have a name, just a designation. The early results, as I looked at the study, looked encouraging. None of the 17 patients in the study had disease progression, and they reported minimal side effects. This immediately offered me hope, something that at that point in time I disliked. So I looked up the study on the clinicaltrials.gov website. This is a really great tool for persons looking for clinical trials. I would encourage you to become familiar with it if you haven't already done so. It's very user-friendly, and currently there are over 500 clinical trials going on for lung cancer. So I looked up the clinical trial for CLN-081, and I saw that it was being offered at several locations throughout the world, and I was hopeful that I would find a location that was nearby, and I was lucky in that I did. The closest location was in Fairfax, Virginia. That's about a 4-hour drive from my home, and that is certainly doable, even though it is traveling up I-95, which most of you know is not the best thing you want to do. So I quickly sent an email to the principal investigator of that study to see if there were any openings. And within minutes, I got a response back that said, yes, there was one. And he said he would schedule his assistant to connect with me on a Zoom call the next morning to discuss my case and see if I fit the criteria. Well, it turns out I did. And it took about 6 weeks for me to actually become enrolled in the study. Now, I don't know about you, but when you have stage 4 lung cancer and you're not getting any treatment, that is an eternity. And that was a very hard time. And that was the point I was at when I was dealing and speaking and dancing at my daughter's wedding. Because at that point, I didn't know if I was accepted into the trial. Well, I'm happy to tell you that on October 27, 2020, I did start the clinical trial. I'm now in the trial 22 months later. For a targeted medicine in pill form, which I take every morning and evening, I've had great response to it. My tumor load has shrunk. I have no more pleural effusion, no new metastases, and I've had virtually no side effects. Yeah, I get a pimple or two on my nose, I get a few cracked nails, I complain to my wife and she laughs at me. Through my treatment, I have continued to feel good and do all of the things I was able to do before I had cancer. I feel very fortunate because I'm able to live a near normal life. While I no longer go to the YMCA each morning, it's not because of my lung cancer. When COVID came along, our YMCA closed, just like all other Jews. Our youngest daughter, Erin, was able to find us a Peloton, and we converted what was formerly a pottery shed on our property into a gym. So Sue and I are now full-fledged Peloton cult members. I don't know how much you know about Peloton, but if you put 2 Peloton people together, that's all they talk about. It is a cult. And I'm a full-fledged member. While I'm not at the very top of the leaderboard anymore, since now I'm competing against hundreds, if not thousands, of others, people around the world, I still finish in the top 20% of all riders, and near to the top of those in my age bracket. For those of you who don't, my rider name is TOG54. That stands for Tough Old Guy and my birth year. My hashtag is living with hundreds. So I want to conclude this talk with the way I began. I am very thankful to be here today. The medicine I'm taking through my clinical trial has given me a life where I wake up each day feeling good and healthy. It has allowed me to be granddad to my first granddaughter, Elise. I was there to celebrate her younger sister, Sydney, and in only a few weeks away, I'll see my little granddaughter. I've been able to body surf in the ocean, go snorkeling. I've swam with manta rays in Hawaii. I've hiked to the top of extinct volcanoes in Iceland. I've biked through the countryside of Vermont with my friends. I've eaten lobster, which I love, along the coast of New England. And all of these things were made possible by my clinical trial. Had I not looked at that Facebook page that day, I don't think I would have been able to do any of these things. Finally, one last story before I close. A few months back, I received a phone call from the company that is the sponsor of my clinical trial. I knew much about them because I was following them since I started. I became a groupie. I actually sent their CEO an email to thank him for making this medicine available to me. They asked if I would be willing to travel to Boston to speak at their first ever company-wide meeting to be held this past June. They wanted their employees to hear firsthand how their medicine was impacting the life of an actual exon 21 cancer patient. I was overwhelmed because I had so much wanted to thank them, and this was my opportunity to do this. Sure, Sue and I got a nice trip to Boston out of it, and we love Boston. But it really gave me the opportunity to say thanks personally to each and every one of them, to tell them that their medicine had made such a big difference in our lives and will make a big difference in the lives of so many other patients like me. My talk went really well. We found out later that it was the highlight of their meeting. Afterwards, we were approached by so many of their employees that there was a line and we felt like celebrities. Looking back on it, it really was the event that was a win-win situation. On one hand, I was so grateful to be able to thank them in person for providing me medicine, which made the impossible possible. But on the other hand, my story was inspirational to them. And they said my story brought a much more purposeful meaning to their life. I will tell you that this Monday, they are sending a film crew to my house in Raleigh to get my full story. So you know what I'll be doing this weekend? I'll be cleaning my house. So, like all people with a cancer diagnosis, my cancer does not ever leave me. Not a day goes by when I do not think of it. I also know that my good fortune can change with each new scan. Right? We all live in this world. Very early in my cancer journey, though, Sue and I made a pledge to make the most out of my remaining time, and I believe we have lived up to this pledge. Although we have not been perfect, we have worked hard to not let cancer get in our way. So I want to say thank you for not harassing me, and I wish that each and every one of you the best in your own fight against this ever so challenging disease. Thank
you. A lot of it comes from the American Cancer Society. They each year produce a report called the ACS Cancer Facts and Figures. It's a very, very, very helpful resource, and if this is something you're interested in, you can go to their website and pull this report down. But so in 2022, January 2022, they released their report that indicates that the estimates for the number of lung cancer cases in the United States, of the roughly 2 million people that will be diagnosed with any type of cancer, about 118,000 men and about 19,000 women will be diagnosed with lung cancer. And that is about 12 to 13% of all the cancers that will be diagnosed in men and women. And then if you look at the causes of death, cancer death, lung cancer is number one by far. And so it's the second leading diagnosed cancer, but it's the number one reason for dying from cancer. And so in 2022, the American Cancer Society estimates that about almost 69,000 men will die from lung cancer, and about 61,300 women will die from lung cancer. And that is 21% for men and for women, 21% of all the deaths from any types of cancer. And so you look at a map like this, and it shows you the incidence rate. And when I use that term incidence, what I mean is those are newly diagnosed cases of lung cancer. And so the incidence rates for lung cancer seem to have a fairly distinct geographic pattern. So what we see is those states kind of in the Appalachian region and in the kind of the Ozark region are areas where we see the highest rates. So the states in red are the states where we see the highest rates of lung cancer. And then also, for some reason, not quite sure, in the states of Maine and Rhode Island, where we also see high rates of lung cancer. And then when we look at deaths from lung cancer, again, looking at the states in red, there's kind of we still see that Appalachian Ozark region, but then it also kind of shifts south and west. So we include Oklahoma in that highest lung cancer death rates, but also the state of Louisiana. And we can sort of look at some of those factors that we'll talk about later as to why that might be the case, what's going on in those populations that would lead to such high rates of cancer incidence, lung cancer incidence and deaths. So looking here at North Carolina, and again, I'll kind of give you the caveat that some of the data that we have available to us is a bit dated, but also there's data that we use to kind of give us as much of a comprehensive picture of cancer in general, but also lung cancer in particular, and how it's impacting our state. So we know that, again, from the ACS report, about 65,000 people in North Carolina will be diagnosed with any type of cancer in 2022. And of those 65,000 people, that there will be about 8,700 people will be diagnosed with lung cancer, and about 4,700 will die of lung cancer. Now, if you look at the incidence rate, so the rate per 100,000 population for both men and for women, you can see two things are notable. One is that men are at much higher risk for lung cancer incidence and death. But also, if you compare it to North Carolina, so the rates of lung cancer diagnosis and lung cancer deaths are about 20 to 25% higher here in North Carolina compared to the national rates. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's the case. And if you look at across the counties in North Carolina, among our 100 counties, so if you look at these data are broken down into quartiles. So the top 25% in lung cancer diagnosis are the counties that are in the darkest orange. So you see that there's kind of a smattering of those high rate counties across the state. We see some clustering in the eastern part of the state and kind of the north central part of the state. And the rates vary from as low as 43 per 100,000 all the way up to, so the county with the highest lung cancer incidence rate is Swain County, which is where the Eastern Band Cherokee Indian Reservation is located. And they have a rate of 86.9 per 100,000. And then if we look at deaths from lung cancer, we see kind of a similar pattern. However, the county with the highest death rate from lung cancer is actually on the eastern part of the state, which is Onslow County, which is where Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune is. And so they have a rate of death from lung cancer of 61 per 100,000. So roughly 61 out of every 100,000 people that live in that county will die from lung cancer. And then we look at another indicator. So we look at diagnosis of cancer, we look at deaths from cancer, but we can also look at survival from cancer. And the data in North Carolina indicates that lung cancer is one of those conditions where we don't have a very good long-term prognosis. So this is observed cumulative relative survival. So roughly what percentage of people, in this case, people who were diagnosed with lung cancer from 2015 to 2019 would still be alive compared to people that were not diagnosed with lung cancer. And so you can see to the far left over there, that percentage is about 21.5%. And that's much lower than it is for any of the other types of cancers that we see. And I apologize if you're chronologically challenged like I am. You probably can't see these numbers, but basically one of the things that we do in cancer research is try to look at what particular populations are at greater risk for certain types of cancers. And this is a table from that ACS report that compares different types of cancer deaths and incidents across different racial and ethnic populations. And so what's interesting is that we don't see a really large difference in lung cancer incidence and death across different racial populations. We do see about a 5 to 10% increase level of death from lung cancer for African Americans, but that's not a huge difference compared to other cancers like cervical cancer or prostate cancer. We see huge disparities there, but with lung cancer we really don't see that, which is kind of surprising given some of the data that we see on risk factors for lung cancer. And we also see that the rates of cancer death has gone down quite a bit over the last 15 to 20 years. And that decline in cancer death is pretty much happening across the board. So it's not just the non-Hispanic white population that's benefiting from this reduction in cancer deaths. That's really occurring in all racial and ethnic populations in our country. Here in North Carolina, if we look at comparing the different racial and ethnic populations as it relates to lung cancer, again, we see fairly similar rates across these populations. There's a slightly increased rate, for incidence, there's not really much of a difference, but for cancer death rates, lung cancer death rates we see for the American Indian population, we do see about a 10 to 15% higher rate of death for lung cancer for that particular population. But for other populations, we really don't see that much of a disparity, or even we see a lower death rate in those populations. Now, this is a graphic that you may be familiar with. It's one that I've used in my teaching for a long time. This is a graphic of cancer deaths in the United States since 1930. And what I want to point out to you is this very unusual shape here. So this starting over here is 1930 up to about 2020. And you can see this tremendous increase in this graphic here is for lung cancer for men. So deaths from lung cancer from 1930 to 2020. And what explains that tremendous increase in the rates of lung cancer deaths among men in our country was that in the 1930s and 40s is that the military gave men who were enlisted in the military cigarettes. And so those men became addicted to those cigarettes, and then you saw these very high rates after World War II. So that's peaking in about the 1970s. And so you see this very odd, very unfortunate peak in lung cancer deaths in this population. And then as the information became available to us on the impact of cigarettes on our health, which was that initial report was published in 1963. Then, as we started putting policies into place to reduce cigarette use in our country, then we started seeing a sharp decline in lung cancer deaths among men in our country. And so this graphic here is for women, and so a much different pattern where the spike is not as high, but the same sort of an increase, a gradual increase that peaked in the 1990s, and a lot of that is because what happened is that in the 60s and 70s there were changes in the cultural norms around women smoking in public, so that led to an increase in the lung cancer death rates among women, and then that started to decline again as we started to implement strategies to address cigarette smoking in our population. Now, if you look at sort of this is as far back as I could go with this graphic, but here in North Carolina, if you look at what has happened with lung cancer incidence and mortality, there's actually very good news that we see over this time period that the incidence rate has really not changed very much during that time period. But what has happened is that we've seen about a 15 to 20% reduction in deaths from lung cancer, and that's largely attributable to earlier detection, better treatment options, and greater awareness of the impact of lung cancer. So that's very good news. And that pattern is really seen across the board, across the different racial and ethnic populations in our country, in our state. And with the exception, again, of the American Indian population, we see kind of a slight increase in the lung cancer mortality rates in the American Indian population in our state. This shows you, again, looking at trends, but this is trends in 5-year survival from post-diagnosis for lung cancer. This is national data, and this is really, really good news. So what has happened since the mid-1970s is that we have seen a significant increase in 5-year survival rates among lung cancer patients, where it has gone from about, if you were diagnosed in the mid-1970s, you had about a 10 to 15% 5-year survival rate, whereas if you were diagnosed in 2011 to 2017, it more than doubled, so about 22% 5-year survival. And that change has occurred both in the non-Hispanic white population and in the African American population. So that's very good news, and hopefully that will continue to increase. So if we look at risk factors for lung cancer, so if we look at cancer in general, what are those major risk factors for cancer, and particularly focusing on those what we call the modifiable risk factors, those that we can change. Certainly at the top of the list is tobacco smoking, so about, as best as we can tell, about 20% of all cancers are attributable to tobacco smoking, followed by excess body weight, alcohol consumption, ultraviolet radiation exposure, particularly for melanoma, poor diet, infections, and physical inactivity. So those are really the big ticket modifiable risk factors for cancer. And then if we look specifically at lung cancer, the 7 risk factors that we can attribute both modifiable and non-modifiable. So smoking cigarettes, which increases your risk 20 times for developing lung cancer, radon exposure, asbestos, environmental tobacco smoke exposure, secondhand smoke, genetics, other lung cancers, and prior radiation. So those are really the 7 risk factors that we focus on for lung cancer. So if we look at smoking rates here in North Carolina, despite all of the public health efforts that we put into tobacco prevention and cessation, still about 16.5% of the adult population in North Carolina indicates that they smoke. And what's really fascinating about this is that there's a very, very clear socioeconomic disparity as it relates to cigarette smoking, from households that have an annual household income of less than $15,000 a year. About 35% of those individuals smoke, down to less than 10% for populations that have a household income of greater than $75,000. And then if you look at the issue of radon testing, and I want to give a shout out to Philip Gibson with the North Carolina Radon Program. I've learned a whole lot from him about this issue, and so we've partnered with him on some educational activities around radon awareness. So we know that this is from a survey of adults in North Carolina. If you look at the percentage of adults who participate in the North Carolina Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey, about 28% of people say that they've tested their homes for radon. But again, we see this socioeconomic disparity where low-income households are much less likely, actually 4 times less likely to have tested their home for radon than households where they have the highest level of income. And we know that there are factors which contribute to the increased risk of cancer, and particularly lung cancer. So we talk about these factors as what we call the social determinants of health. And those are the factors that are related to how we live our lives and the things that we're exposed to. And so we have a better understanding now of what contributes to risk associated with factor. What are those sort of upstream factors that contribute to people who are at increased risk for developing cancer? And we know that about 40% of the factors that contribute to the health of the population are related to these social and economic factors that we call the social determinants of health. And that's why in our office, in the Office of Cancer and Health Equity, we put an emphasis on being equitable about the work that we do, where we try to engage populations in such a way to where we meet their needs, and rather than just having a cookie cutter approach to what we do, that we ensure that the work we do fits what the populations that we work with and meets their needs, as this illustration shows. And I want to give a shout out to my colleagues at Duke and UNC. We've just recently developed a program called the Southeastern American Indian Cancer Health Equity Partnership. As was mentioned, I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe, and so there's a significant burden of cancer in our community, in the Lumbee community, and and tribal communities across the state. You may not be aware that North Carolina has the largest American Indian population in the eastern United States. So we are working together, Duke, UNC, and Wake Forest. This is not basketball, so we can do that. So we're working together to work with our tribal communities across the state. And so as it relates to lung cancer screening, this is something where the technology is developing and our ability to engage with communities about lung cancer screening is increasing. And so if you look at the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommendation, they recommend that high-risk individuals between the ages of 50 to 80 get screened using a low-dose CT scanner to get screened for lung cancer. The challenge that we have is that very few people who are eligible to be screened and who are in that high-risk category actually get screened. So the latest data that we have from the CDC is only about 12% of people who meet that eligibility criteria actually get screened for lung cancer, and so that's a really big problem. I will give a shout out to Melissa Wheeler and her team at the Levine Cancer Institute in Charlotte. They have actually 2 lung buses that they take out into the community. They've now gone out to 23 counties in North Carolina and hosted community lung cancer screening events. So they've done, I think it's over 6,000 or 7,000 screenings they've done. So just a tremendous job that they're doing with the lung buses there at the Levine Cancer Institute. So obviously what we want to do as much as we can is to prevent cancer, and so avoiding those risk factors that I mentioned earlier, but certainly the treatment options, if you are screened and detected, there's certainly wonderful treatment options like surgery and radiation and chemotherapy and targeted therapies, and so the ability to work with your healthcare provider and get the appropriate treatments is very important. And I also want to give a shout out to my colleagues, Dr. Sam Seichert and Dr. Jenny King at UNC, who just recently participated in a lung cancer trial, actually lung and breast cancer trial, called the ACURE trial, and it was designed to help address disparities in treatment and outcomes for lung and breast cancer. It was a national study, and they showed tremendous success in addressing those disparities in lung and breast cancer outcomes across the populations. So that's it. I think I'm out of time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. This is my email address and my phone number, and my grandson Everett, my 2-year-old grandson, so you have to see pictures of him. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
By the LCI. This is our team. It was 2 third-year students now, and us along with 3 of our professors who work on this project with us. And why did we need a project like ours? So a majority of people diagnosed with lung cancer are age 70 and older. So anyone can get it, as you've seen people as young as 45 and younger have been diagnosed. But older adults have a higher risk of falling, which is why we tried to bring in a balanced aspect to our project. So I'm going to walk you through some of these infographics. As you can see up here, 1 in 3 older adults will fall a day, and because of this fall risk, they're at higher risk for injury, fracture, and death. Why older people fall is due to age-related changes more frequently, so decreased vision and light contrast sensitivity, not being able to see where they're going in their homes, dizziness and nausea or weakness from medications that they may be prescribed, as well as just slipping, tripping due to loss of traction, and slowed reflexes and increased postural sway. And this can be helped by physical therapy to improve their muscle mass and reflex time, just to help prevent some of these risk factors. And then we can educate as well on how to maintain these gains that we make in physical therapy. And then we can also give education on how to make changes at home, making sure that you have an uncluttered walkway, good lighting, maybe install grab bars or handles along places that have been frequent avoidances for falls or risk of falls, and then permanent changes that could be made and make referrals for that. All right, so our program had a lot of different kind of areas of content. We worked on balance, as I mentioned, but also things like quality of life and cognition, anxiety, and depression levels, all associated with this fear of falling and loss of your functional balance. We worked on some functional activities as well as strength, endurance, and power, all working towards training those muscles better. And then physical activity and performance, and as I mentioned, fear of falling was a really big factor. So how did we get people like survivors to be part of our program? We came to places like this. We presented at another meeting similar to this one. We reached out to support groups. We put an ad on the radio, which no one wanted. But we also reached out on Facebook, Instagram, a lot of social media ads, and we just tried to get it out there and help anyone that we could, because it was a virtual program, so anyone in North Carolina could take part. We also have some testimonials up here that we have a little bit of videos on later, but we really emphasized that it was a virtual program. We stated it was 6 weeks, 4 of intervention and 2 with kind of just a preparation. The first one we did some quick assessments and filled out some surveys, and then we ended the same way.
So expanding on that a little bit more about the program. So we started, our first week was a pre-intervention survey. So we mail our participants a bunch of surveys that measure quality of life, previous exercise, current exercise, and various other functional measures. And then we started with a screening, day of screening. So we would get on Zoom and we would do a various number of tests, 8-foot walk test, 5 times sit to stand, 6-meter walk test, and other things to measure functional capabilities. And then we did a 4-week exercise intervention, and I'll go into the interventions a little bit more in the next slide. And then after that, we sent them the same surveys and did the same screening to see if any changes were made for the participants. So the interventions, we did variations of these 4 exercises. So hip 3-way, partial squats, standing marches, and sit to stands. And I can show you guys these exercises more after the presentation, but all of these interventions were modified in various different ways. The first thing we did was we introduced an unstable surface for the participants. So we would ask them to fold up a blanket or use a pillow to stand on, and we would have them do the exercises on an unstable surface to challenge their balance. And then we would give them cognitive dual tasking or physical dual tasking. So we would say something like count back from 100 by 7s, or we'd have them pass a water bottle back and forth, turn their head side to side, or all 3 of those things in some cases. And then we would also just increase the number of sets and reps that these participants would do throughout the program. So by the end, with some participants, it would be, okay, do a squat while turning your head side to side, counting backwards by 100, counting backwards from 100 by 7s, and passing a water bottle. So it became pretty intense by the end. So what did we find? So we saw improvements in perceived level of function and improvements in fall risk associated with functional deficits. So with the improvements in perceived level of function, we saw a significant statistical difference in specifically the FES-I, which measures functional abilities for the participant. And then we also had a statistical significant difference in 5 times sit to stand time, which showed improvements in functional strength. And then all the other graphs that you see here, we had a difference and we were trending in the right direction, but they just weren't able to be statistically significant. And then we have one testimonial video here.
And so it became clear what the goal was. And, you know, the goal is to improve my balance so that I'm less of a fall risk. And I think that's really important as we age. And so I just feel like I got a lot out of that because I think my fall risk has decreased.
That's awesome. And we saw that the test showed that too, so it all correlates really well.
Yeah.
The second question they had kind of ties into what you just said, but on a day-to-day basis, have you noticed changes, and if so, what are they?
I have noticed changes. Some of the yoga poses are easier for me now. So I think that kind of is indicative of the fact that I'm doing better. Obviously, I'm doing better because of the testing you just put me through. I still have concerns about my left foot not being that great. I'm not sure how much that's going to progress, or if it's just one of those things that it reaches plateau. You know, I don't know that at this point. I've been working at it for over a month now, and while it may have improved, it has not gotten to the point where it's the same as the right.
Yep.
And I have to be able to tell myself that it's okay. You know, I've got a right foot, and between the two of them, they'll keep, you know.
Yep. And it's one of those things where all of our movements that we have are focused on both legs. And while it might not be equal between the two, as long as you keep giving the same effort between the two, you'll keep them maintained at the same rate. So that's good.
Yeah.
Well, Jenny, it has been our pleasure to do this over the last few weeks. And we're so appreciative that you've been a part of this.
Yeah, I thank you, and you know, I will try my very best to keep it up because I do see some results, and I don't want to start lapsing.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to reach out to either of us if you have any follow-up questions or anything.
Okay.
We're always available.
Yes.
It'll have both our emails in the intervention today when we send it. We'll include both our emails, but don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Ty. I appreciate all your help.
Thank you.
We have one more testimony.
Say is for the mountain. And I feel like I've met, I mean, I think I still have a way to go, but I'm looking forward to playing golf this weekend so I can see if it helps. Because it should. It helped me stay centered, you know, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'll let you guys know, I'll let Ty know.
Yes, please do let us know.
Yeah.
When you hit your hole in one, can you send us a picture of it? I said, when you hit your hole in one, can you send us a picture of it?
I've only had those in my life.
Alright, so the audio on that was a little not great, sorry about that. But we really enjoyed this program. It was really awesome to create changes in participants in a virtual setting, something that the research kind of was lacking. And it was great to hear from those participants that they really saw functional changes on a day-to-day basis, whether it's playing golf or just walking around feeling more confident in themselves. So thank you to the One Parents Initiative for letting us do this research.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.